Oh, God.
Hey.
Jesus, dude, what the fuck?
When's the last time you made a video?
I don't know, like 2 years ago?
You should make another one.
Well, I'm not really ready.
Just do it.
Right now? Right now.
Yes, right now.
Okay. Let's do a video. Let's do a video.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Been a while. Pretty sure I could pull this off. Let's do it. Hello everyone, my name is Welsh217. Welcome back to my channel. What seems like in the not-so-recent years, there's been a pretty big boom as far as retro gaming goes. And so, in that vein, I want to start a new series that deals with older games that I feel like don't really get talked about. I feel like there's a lot of unspoken gems you just don't really hear a lot about from people who cover retro games. All that being said, welcome to the first episode of Outdated, Underrated. Today I'm going to be covering one of my favorite side-scrollers that was released on the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo in 1994, called Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel. This game was developed by Iguana Entertainment and published by Sunsoft, the same people who did Aero the Acrobat and Aero the Acrobat 2. The game was released with relative praise. It earned some pretty high marks with an 8.25 out of 10 from Electronic Gaming Monthly when it was released. Personally, I think it's a really fun side-scroller. I've played the hell out of it. Today I'm going to be discussing how Zero came to be as a character, the concept of the game, and then I'm going to be going through some of its strengths and weaknesses as far as game mechanics and design go. Let's start with Zero as a character. So Zero is a red squirrel whose character design comes from a couple of things. One, he's a kamikaze. If you don't know what the term kamikaze is, it was a name typically given to Japanese airplane fighters during World War II. What they would do is they would intentionally load their airplanes up with explosives and fly the planes into Allied ships to blow them up.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
They were essentially suicide bombers in airplanes. Interesting little tidbit that I found out doing research for this video. Kamikaze in Japanese actually means God wind or divine wind. Just a little food for thought, I don't know. I'm here to educate, spread knowledge, whatever. The more you know. A lot of the kamikaze pilots would wear headbands that had the rising sun symbol done on the front of it. So you'll see Zero with one of these and a airplane fighter bomber jacket. The other part of his character design definitely comes from like 1990s action movies, most notably Jean-Claude Van Damme. You can definitely see the influence there. He's also a bit of an angsty edgelord, as you find out in the opening cutscene. Zero's character design is kind of interesting because it was released at the same time as Aero the Acrobat 2, and they kind of have this shared universe thing going on. In the opening cutscene for Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel, Zero receives a letter from his girlfriend Amy saying that an evil lumberjack, Jacques Lachettes, is cutting down their forest in order to print counterfeit money. and that he has kidnapped Amy's father and is holding him hostage. Now, Zero is under the employment of an evil clown named Edgar Ector, who is also the main antagonist from the Arrow the Acrobat games. Zero tells Ector that he needs to return home to save his forest. Ector, of course, tries to forbid Zero from doing this, and Zero defies him. This leads into the start of the first level, where Zero is shot down over a beach. So after Zero crashes, this starts the events of the entire game. You go from level to level, starting with the beach, which is a pretty straightforward side-scrolling level. Run through the level, fight enemies, grab collectibles, health and extra lives, try and find some secrets. Nothing really to talk about with that level. The next level is called Cliffs. Now, this is where I think some of Zero's level design becomes a little more unique because it adds a lot more verticality. You go just as much upwards as you go sideways. You also get your first mini-bosses and then your first boss fight at the end of a level. After that, we have the quintessential lava level where, of course, you can't touch the ground because it's made of lava, called Tunnels. Tunnels level design starts to kind of combine the side-scrolling of the first level and the verticality of the second level, where there's lots of areas where you go side to side quite a bit, but there are a lot of areas that you can climb to and find different pickups and extra lives and health pickups and stuff like that. After that, you have Rapids, which is one of the 2 jet ski levels. I'm going to touch on these a little bit more, but for now, we're just going to move on to the next level, Stony Forest, which is the forest that Lashitz is cutting down to print his fake money. This level is mostly vertical, and there's no actual base to the level, so if you fall off any of the trees while you're climbing through it, you're going to instantly die. The second stage of this level ends with a boss fight with a character I like to call Wolvertooth or Saberine, because he looks like if Wolverine and Sabretooth were to settle their difference and have some sort of love child. After you defeat him, you move on to the next jet ski level called Toxic.
Baby, can't you see?
Where you're riding a jet ski basically through toxic waste, leading up to the final level. Factory is essentially the money printing operation that Lashitz is running. You make your way through 2 stages of this. Once you get to the end of the second stage, you refight all the bosses from the previous levels, and then you lead up to the final boss fight with Lashitz. And then there's a fun little twist after you defeat Lashitz. I'm going to touch on that as I break down this game a little bit more. So overall, I do think this game deserves a lot of praise. I think it got knocked as a Sonic clone when it was first released, but I really do think it can stand on its own as a pretty unique game. It's got a lot of good things, but there are definitely some negative drawbacks that I think reviewers came across when they were talking about this game. So let's go ahead and break this game down. So, like I said, I have a lot of praise for this game. I think there's a lot of great design put into it. Visually, it's awesome. The color palette for this game is very vibrant. It does have a very cartoony feel, but it also kind of has this grittiness to it too, with some of the cutscenes. They're only lightly animated, but they look very vibrant and full, and it really seems like they were pushing what the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo was capable of visually at the time. The character design is really cool. The boss fights all feel really unique. I think they can all stand on their own. First boss fight are these rock men, which is a little generic, but it's a fun and challenging boss fight because you have to fight 2 of them at the same time, and their movement's really sporadic, so it can be pretty challenging. The next boss fight is against this dude in a bat outfit, and then at the end of the boss fight, Zero picks him up by his collar and threatens him, and it's just, like I said, it's got some grittiness to it, and I really dig that. And you fight this dude in a biosuit, you fight Saberine Wolvertooth, whatever his name is, and then the last boss fight with Lashitz is a little lackluster, but it has its own challenges, and once you figure it out, you can get through it. It's still a lot of fun, but it can be more challenging based on your movement more than anything else, really. Also, one of my favorite parts of the game, one of my favorite boss fights in the game is when you refight the dude in the biosuit, you get to have a jetpack too. And for some reason, it's a super easy boss fight, but it's also just a lot of fun because it's a squirrel in a jetpack. I mean, do you really need anything more than that?
Where the fuck is my jetpack?
The sound design of the game is pretty outstanding. Not just the sound effects, but the actual music design, I think, can compete with games like Sonic the Hedgehog.
That's a bold statement.
It's just some really, really great sound design. Doing my research for the game, I found out it's a sound designer by the name of Rick Fox. It turns out he actually played keyboards for David Bowie at one point. He's also done sound design for a lot of other of my favorite video games, like Turok Dinosaur Hunter, the first one, and Shadow Man. I didn't realize that it was the same guy through all of these. I just thought that was really, really cool. He does some just phenomenal sound design, especially some of the like early mid-90s video games. Also, a pretty notable thing with Zero is that the controls are pretty great. It is a point where Zero starts to fall flat a little bit in some ways, but I'm gonna get to that. Otherwise, there's a variety of attacks that you can use. He's got nunchucks, he can throw shurikens, he can dive bomb, he can swoop attack. There's just a lot of variety to how he moves. I think the way that you can use Zero as a character makes this game stand apart from other side-scrollers. So the first meh thing I would say in this game shows up with repetition of enemies throughout the levels. You'll notice that every level has some unique enemies and they change within the first 3 levels, but after that you get a lot of repetition of using the same enemies just copy-pasted into later parts of the levels. This doesn't really apply to the final stage of the game, but I think the game could have been better had they had more enemy variety. Also, the jet ski levels they're just kind of lame. There's nothing really to them. You're just moving left to right. They're not challenging unless you force yourself to try and accelerate. Essentially what it is you can push right on the D-pad and it makes Zero go faster. And if you're just doing this the whole time, it makes the levels kind of ridiculously hard. It's hard to see what obstacles. There's like rocks and pieces of wood floating through the water as you're going through the level, and it can just be pointlessly hard if you're accelerating, but if you don't accelerate, there's literally no challenge to it. Essentially all you have to do is go slowly up until you come up to a bunch of obstacles and then accelerate and jump over them. There's a couple of enemies, there's nothing really that hard about them. There's these scuba diving dudes that will jump onto the front of your jet ski and prevent you from jumping, but you just gotta mash the buttons until you punch them off, and there's really no challenge to it. They really just kind of feel like filler to make the game longer. It's also not a very long game. Also, like I said, there's a lot of variety with how you can use Zero, with like the different attacks and stuff he can use, but I think there's almost too much. There's a couple of attacks that you never use them, and then the shurikens kind of feel pointless by the end of the game because most, if not every enemy can block them. They just bounce off them, and you still get pickups for shurikens, so they become pretty much useless near the end of the game. I kind of feel like with some of the playtesting, they could have had the design a little bit tighter if they had limited some of the attacks that Zero can use. Alright, now let's get into some of the bullshit with this game. Along with the repetition of the enemies, I did say that there's a lot of unique enemies with each one of the levels. This usually comes in the form of enemies that are really frustrating to deal with. They will attack you from off screen, they will hit you while you're in midair, and they will knock your health down every single time, and they will drive you insane. Particularly in the level Cliffs. There's these little eggs with feet underneath them, and they jump, and they always jump before you see them on screen, so you'll be jumping up to some other area and they will inevitably hit you, and it drives me crazy.
She was a bad egg.
Where's she gone?
Where all the other bad eggs go. Down the garbage chute.
Same within the forest level, there's these butterflies that dive bomb you, and they can start their attack from off screen, and if you don't kill them when you first see them, if they just hit you and move on, they'll respawn. And a lot of times, they will knock you off of whatever platform you're on and send you plummeting to the ground, and you automatically lose a life.
Are you gonna cry? Freaking little kid.
It's just... Also, like I said with the controls, there are 2 movements in this game that drive me nuts. One of them you don't have to worry about. It's called a flick flack. It's this weird little ballet leap thing that Zero uses. It's pretty much pointless. There's one section where they try to force you to use it, and then you never have to deal with it ever again. There are forced movement parts of this game, though. Scattered throughout the entire game, there are these sections called dive tests, where you jump up in the air, press down, and then for Sega Genesis, it's the C button. I can't remember what it is for Super Nintendo, but it sends him into a dive. From there, you can control the dive, starting downwards, and then you can push right or left on the D-pad, and he will swoop left or right, and then you can press up, and it'll send him rocketing upwards. The farther the fall, the higher he will go once you go upwards. The problem with this is, in the forced sections, a lot of times it can be a little finicky. You're moving so quickly and going through such narrow areas that you're gonna do a couple of things. You're either gonna smack into a wall because you press right or left too early. You're gonna press right or left too late and just smack into the ground and have to climb your way all the way back up to where the test started. In some cases, you can't even do that. You just have to figure out how to get to where you were supposed to be. Or you're gonna get to the end of the dive and realize that you haven't gained enough momentum to make it up to where you're supposed to be. This is especially the case when it comes to the forest level, and the last 3 dive tests in the game are the most frustrating because you're given this sliver of space to navigate Zero through, and you usually have to end up doing it over and over and over again. Most of my footage capture, I didn't use save states because I was using a Sega Genesis emulator, but during these sections I did, because sometimes getting back up to the area you're supposed to start the dive test is just the biggest pain in the ass, and after you have to do it 6 or 7 or even 10 fucking times, it gets old. It gets really, really, really old. Thank God for save states. It's not cheating. It's how games should have been in the first place. So earlier in the video, I mentioned that there's a twist at the end. So turns out, big surprise, Edgar Ector is actually the final boss of the game.
What a twist!
He's been the mastermind behind Lashit's cutting down the forest and printing fake money. So the Lashit's boss fight takes place on the roof of the factory. After you defeat Lashit's, you run to the edge of the roof and you see Ector escaping in some sort of ship, and you climb a rope to come after him. After you board Ector's ship, you find Amy tied up and you cut her loose, and then you start the boss fight with Ector. Ector's boss fight is really easy, but also kind of confusing. There's 3 stages to his boss fight. First, he starts off throwing grenades at you and launching these laser pie things.
Frickin' laser beams!
What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to double jump and bounce the grenades back at him when he throws them at you. After that stage, he goes into this weird little energy cocoon thing, and then you have to nunchuck him every time he kind of swoops down at you without letting him hit you. And then the final part. This is where I used to give up as a kid because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. He puts up this impenetrable shield in front of him, which looks like 3 hovering bongos. I don't really know what they're actually supposed to be, and I'm not gonna bother to look it up. He puts up the bongos. You can't nunchuck them. You can't throw shurikens at him. Not that those work at this point of the game anyway. If you try to dive on them, it takes one of your health points away. You can't swoop attack them. I'm like, what the hell are you supposed to do? So then I finally figured it out. You'll notice that Amy is crouched in front of Ector at this point, and she's sort of cupping her hands. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to jump on Amy, and she launches you up into the air, and you slam down on Ector. You just have to do that 3 times, and that's the end of the boss fight. Super fucking lame, especially for a final boss fight. Ector's body goes flying off screen, you jump and escape the ship, and then the end cut scene is Ector's ship flying into the cliffs and exploding, and then Amy and Zero floating down to safety via parachute. That's the end. Roll credits. Woo! So I realized through picking apart the game, I kind of focused on some of the negative things.
Oh, come on. Stop whining.
It just sucks because this game could be pretty flawless had they taken the time to just tighten a few things up. Not repeating enemies, making the final boss fight a little more interesting than what it was. As fun as the game is through its entirety, there's just a few mechanics and design flaws that make it definitely lose some points. I know I said I emulated, but I actually still have my original game cartridge from when I was like 10 years old. It's just a gem from my childhood. I love it. Like I said, it's definitely one of my favorite side-scrollers. In fact, I didn't even really think of making this video until I was thumbing through my Sega Genesis games, and I was like, oh, you know what? I forgot about this game. I should do a video on that. So here we are. All right, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Outdated Underrated. I'm trying to switch up the style in which I talk about video games. I don't want to just do these really long 40-minute videos of me playing through one section of a game anymore. If you do want to see full game playthroughs, I do that pretty regularly on my Twitch channel. That's just W3LSH217 on Twitch. You can also find me on Twitter at JCMW3LSH217. Anyway, guys, a lot of exciting stuff. I'm trying to switch up my channel. Really glad to be back making another video. I'm just going to try and improve my content more and more as we go, and I appreciate you watching. I will see you guys all in the next video. Peace.